So hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us for our live workshop today as part of our Thrive membership. And if you're watching the recording, welcome to the replay. Today, we are going to be discussing posture. And I know for somebody like me who spends a ton of time at my desk, on my laptop, on the couch, binge watching stuff, I'm finding myself hunching over and slouching a lot. So I know I'm not alone in this, and that some of the back pain is definitely due to that. So I wanted to bring somebody in today who could educate us a little bit about posture, and that is our guest expert, Dr. Jessica Corman, and she is going to help us improve our posture. So let me introduce Jessica to everybody. Jessica holds her doctorate in physical therapy, and she owns her own private practice in Portland, Oregon. She has been assessing spines for 10 years and understands the value of pain-free movement from her own personal journey. Jessica's practice focuses on those with chronic pain, particularly in the areas of the hips, pelvis, and lower back. She specializes in pelvic floor rehab and often includes this missing link for those who have tried many different avenues for relief from more traditional back and hip pain. She also performs ergonomic assessments to help out spines that work, especially those stuck behind a desk. Yes, thank you.
So thank you for that intro. We're here to talk about improving your posture, small changes for long-term benefits. So as Helen said, please feel free to interrupt me at any time, especially since we're such a small group. I prefer it to be more interactive. And in fact, you'll find as we go, we're going to interact right away. So first, just a little overview. We're going to identify what is this healthy spine that we're talking about. How do we know when we see one? Then we're going to discuss what a healthy spine posture might be in practice for you. And then hopefully we're going to demonstrate some ways to support that healthy spine posture with what any therapist loves to talk about, which are activities of daily living. We even have a funny little acronym, the ADLs is what we call them. And then hopefully, especially since we have a small group, we'll be able to determine for each of you how you want to think about integrating small changes into your daily life to support that healthy spine going forward. Okay, so what is a healthy spine? I spend all of my time thinking about this. So this visual that I'm showing you here is something that if you have been in PT school, you've seen it like 100 times. It's from this book that I can look at on my shelf that I still have from this woman, Dr. Kendall, who has now since passed. But she was the first person to really talk about how we test muscles and how to look at posture. Now, I will say, in looking at these, the idea here is that we're taught to look at like a plumb line and like, how does this line meander through someone's body? And I would say like, yes, that is helpful. And it doesn't give me very much to then think about and how to change. So I'm going to overlay the way that I think about this, which is partially my own and partially from some of my manual therapy training. So if we look at this figure on the far left, this is like ideal alignment, okay? So the pelvis here, I'm putting it in a square and I'm kind of tagging it according to its anatomy. So this is a pelvis that is really upright. And then we see, if we outline the rib cage, here the pelvis and the rib cage are really nicely balanced over each other. Does everyone see that? And does that make sense? So for me, this is a much more helpful visual because now as we overlay it on B, for example, you can see right away that that pelvis is actually tipped quite a bit forward. And so then the rib cage is sort of like backward balanced over that shifted square. Does that make sense? And then we can see in this next one that someone's sort of like tucking their tail. And then the rib cage is like balanced on the forward end of it. And then finally in this last one, something relatively similar. So I like the block analogy, partly because then I can start to think, what happens over time? And this is something that I think can be really helpful to ask yourself. So if we look at that ideal alignment, right? If you imagine like gravity over time, if we were to reference something from my childhood, like Mario, when you get like stomped as the little Mario character, right? You just go like straight into the ground. But if you were any of these B, C, or D postures, can you appreciate how actually there would be like a break point for that person? Does that make sense when you look at the visual? And so when I'm evaluating someone, I'm really interested in where are the break points or the hinge points, because that almost always tells us where stress is being born in the body. Okay, so we're jumping right into a quiz. Hope you guys are ready. We're going to start with some photos. So I want you to give me a thumbs up if you think it's a healthy spine, or a thumbs down if you think it's not a healthy spine. So first one. Yep, you got it. If we look at her blocks, right, she's like really stretched out on all the front side of the blocks is how I think of it. Or most likely, if you want my evaluation, I would say this person either has low back pain or hip pain in the front. And that's because those are the two places that end up picking up that stress. Now, it's not to say that that is going to be right every time. This person could just have knee pain, but it often lines up. What about this person? I think this is great. I think if you don't mind chiming in, like, what was your hesitation? Maybe like Jade, what was your hesitation for why you thought maybe this wasn't aligned?
I couldn't tell if this person was a little bit forward, like if their back was tucked more, or not tucked, more outward.
Yeah. Okay. So I wondered if you would think that. So this is something that is, we'll experience it when we go through our postures together. But I think without getting like too deep in the weeds, I think we often think that people's posture should be lined up over their heels, but it actually should be aligned over the whole foot, which means our standing posture from the side almost appears a tiny bit pitched forward. And we'll probably experience that a little bit in our bodies. Thank you for answering. Okay, what about this one? Yeah, and I would say, so this is a really interesting one. If you look at her blocks, can you see how that is like a completely unstable stacking of blocks? Like if gravity were playing a role here, like those blocks wouldn't, like if those were just blocks, they wouldn't stay, right? The top one would like fall off. What that means is that this is a muscular holding pattern. So this person, in my mind's eye, is like not breathing. And this is probably not actually her long-term posture. This is like when, you know, her mom or whomever is like, stand up straight. So I put this in here because I think it's equally important to realize that when we sort of like overly slump is when a lot of people think of having like bad posture. There's also the equal and opposite side to that, which is an overheld posture. So, you know, honestly, if she were to actually relax, she might look much more like that very first person we saw who was kind of slunk back, but we don't know. She's not breathing. Okay, what about this person? Yep. This person for me invokes this sense of calm. And I don't know if that's because I've been doing this for so long that I just like feel like I can feel the energy of a spine that is like actually supported versus a spine that isn't. But I see this person and I think it looks like she's at rest. And that's what we want an efficient posture to be. An efficient posture is not effortful. It's not like this. It's one in which we have stacked our blocks and our blocks are able to support each other. So there is effort. There's effort in understanding where your blocks are and how to like figure out how to manage them, if you will. But there, once you're in that posture, there shouldn't be like a, oh man, my shoulders feel really tired, or oh, my back feels really tired. That to me says that that's not the right posture for you. Okay, why does posture matter? I believe it was Aristotle who first said, we are what we repeatedly do, or we are what we do. And I'm going to use this one illustration that I really like to use. So a lot of people that I see come to me often after they have like started a full-time job, and maybe they're, 5 to 10 years into that full-time job. So, this person started a desk job maybe. So here this person is sitting at their desk, and you can see the block stacking that they're choosing, right? This is like not the most optimal thing. And can you guys see my cursor? So what tends to happen when we sustain a posture for a really long time is our bodies adapt. And that's the thing that can be really detrimental if we continue to use a same posture over time, is that now it's not just this relationship between the square block and the oval block of the rib cage. Now the rib cage itself is actually making adaptations to where the stress points are in the way gravity is interacting with the rib cage. And so I always joke, it seems like this person's like, oh, okay, I know I have a desk job. I'm there like 8 to 10 hours a day. So I know what I'll do. I'll go biking. But it's like the same posture, but more exaggerated. So I like to illuminate this for people because it can be really helpful to at least have some thought process into what are the postures that I habitually do, and how then can I help my body detrain whatever I train intentionally. Does that make sense?
So are you saying, Jessica, that our bodies literally our bones and everything will change longer term? Like when I see somebody who's elderly, who's hunched over, who has like that, I don't know what it's called, that bump in the back, is that from like poor posture for decades, and it's just your body kind of becomes like that?
So 2 points on that. So technically there is a dowager's hump.
Yes.
That is actually a genetic, inherited condition.
Okay.
So that is like a fatty deposit gets laid down here. I don't know much more about it other than that.
Okay.
This person, I would say, like if we look at their posture, this is stress over time. So what we see is actually what first happens is that there's this really weird phenomenon called creep, which means that when we hold a posture for longer than 20 minutes, any posture for longer than 20 minutes, our soft tissue elongates to adapt to that posture. So it changes. And so if this person is here for 20 minutes and then they stand back up, it won't adapt, because then you're doing the reverse. But if you do this day after day, time after time, hour after hour, you will get the soft tissue will elongate. And then by soft tissue, I usually first mean like ligamentous support. Then you also start to see the muscles adapt. So the muscles on the front side of this person's body become really short because they're always short, and the ones on the back become long because they're always long. So then they can't even straighten up as much because the tight muscles in the front are so tight, they pull them back into this posture. And the muscles in the back are so long that they're weak. And they're like, oh, we can't pull that head back anymore. Does that make sense? And so then you do get skeletal adaptations in the bony structure to that stress over time. Our bones are always relaying down to help adapt to whatever demand we are placing on them. Yeah. So it does change over time. It just, the amount of time that you spend in that posture determines which structures are changing. So does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And what, this is like I think this person is clearly faking it, but still illustrates the point a little bit, that as if we were to see this person over time, what sometimes can happen if you only sit and sit, sit for work, sit for bike, only do all of your exercise in this posture, it can become almost impossible to become upright again. Unlikely, uncommon to not be able to totally get upright, but you will get those adaptations to where it's more and more work to actually get out of that posture. And I mean, I want to be alarmist, but not too alarmist. Sorry, I'm being sort of alarmist. But it's like this person's relationship of where the blocks are gets more fixed. As we age, unfortunately, 40 is considered orthopedically old. That is when we first start to notice that the passive structures in our body break down. So if you think of like discs and cartilage, those start their process of cellular death at 40, which is a little disheartening. But we're still evolving to live longer. We were evolved to live to like 35 or 40 for a while. So our bodies are still kind of like catching up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, you could see often what happens for these people who look like this gentleman here is that their spine is kind of frozen in this position, and it's called spinal stenosis. And so there's just no more ability to get upright. Okay, that was depressing. Let's move on to something maybe more. This is not going to be more uplifting yet, but okay, sitting. So we just covered standing. And when we do it together, we're going to cover sitting first and then standing. So now we're going to talk about sitting postures. So same thing, we're going to do thumbs up, thumbs down, what you think about these sitting postures. Yeah. The blocks are real not in agreement about what's upright. I mean, this person is at least supporting their trunk with their elbows, which can be helpful, but no, I would not want this person to do that.
Andrea, did you put your thumbs up? What?
I missed
Explain
it.
yourself, young lady.
Well, he's got his elbows on his knees, and I don't know if the chair is ergonomically correct, but to me, he looked like he was supporting. He wasn't hunched over. He was supporting his back with his elbows.
So you're right. And that's, yeah, as I was just saying, he is balancing himself by giving himself what I kind of call like a little tent rod here. Like, right, he's like creating a little more tension release.
Right.
Remember, everything is how much time you spend there. So if he is this a bad posture to sit in for 20 minutes? No. Is it a bad posture to sit in for an hour? Not necessarily, but to work in? No. If you're going to spend hours during the day, my guess is there's so much gap between where this pelvic block and rib cage block is. He's going to get elongation of those lumbar spine muscles, and that is going to hurt over time. That's discal pressure that is occurring there. Not to mention that a lot of people can't tolerate deep knee flexion like that for a really long time. I mean, the good news about our bodies is usually if we tune in, we can be like, oh crap, I'm like kind of uncomfortable. Like my knee feels like it needs to be straightened out. Those are natural processes that we need to listen to because our body is communicating with us like, hey, Jessica, like this doesn't feel good. So part of this is increasing your awareness is what I would like to do. And then part of it is like increasing your awareness is one thing. So you're like, okay, my knee's telling me it doesn't want to be bent anymore. But like, what's the next step? Like how do you actually get into a posture where your body's like, oh, I can sustain this for a good amount of time, maybe a couple hours, right? That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. How about this person? Yeah, I agree. I think she looks great. If we look at her blocks, she is tipped a little forward, right? But her blocks are tipped forward together. So she's in a little bit more hip flexion. She's flexed more here as opposed to being really upright in her blocks. Does this make sense when I'm saying this? But what matters more is respecting block to block. So she's actually using some really good range of motion in her hip to achieve this little sort of pitched forward position. And then, as Andrea was saying with the other person, now she's using her elbow to rest because she's not using her backrest. So this is probably a posture that she could sustain for quite some time.
So the fact that she's hinging forward, like her pelvis and upper body together are in a line, even if they're hinged a little forward from the hip, that's good.
Yes.
Okay.
So I always struggle with like when to bring in this concept, and I was struggling with where to put it in this presentation, so I'm going to plop it here. Our spines are meant to be integral to like the spine itself. So when we're looking at these blocks, we're looking at the pelvis is still part of the spine. Does that make sense, right? That the bones in our spine come down and connect to our sacrum, which then connects us to our pelvis. So really the pelvis and rib cage all the way up to our head, we're meant to move mostly together. So the large part of what I'm showing you is how to keep those together so that then you operate by moving more in your big joints, which is where movement was designed to come from biomechanically. So if you respect your spine, I kind of call it, then you tend to move in your hips, knees, ankles, elbows, shoulders more. And that's good because those joints are huge. They have huge ranges of motion. So we are designed to use them. They have the muscular support for that kind of action. But rounding our spine or overextending our spine, those are all tiny, tiny, tiny joints. So they're meant to be used at the end of using those other big joints first. Does that make sense? So if we're reaching for something and we reach with my whole shoulder, but I need to actually extend my back to reach up higher, fine, because I use my whole shoulder first. But I don't want to reach for something and immediately bend in my back before I have used the available range in my huge shoulder joint. Does this make sense? Okay, it's really near and dear to my heart concept. Okay, yours truly here doing a little modeling. Good posture, bad posture. So you can see my blocks, not super great. How about this person? Okay, so I figured this would be divisive. That's why it's the last one. So for those who said yes, I think it was maybe just Helen. Why yes?
Well, I mean, she looked like she was, when I was looking at her hips and back, they look to be pretty much in a good line. I mean, her shoulders are a little hunched forward, which is not great, but she is supporting her arms. So on the balance, I was a positive on this.
Other people, why did you choose no?
Oh, I chose no because she is rounded back. I can see where her stomach, the shirt is wrinkled like she's hunched more over. And I didn't see the arms as supporting, but just more hanging there. And she's much more over her thighs to knees than she is back.
Anyone else care to comment? Okay, I think this is good. So I hear you on the wrinkle shirt, actually. Like, is she bending a little bit in her thoracic spine? Very possibly. But generally, I would say she is using her hip range of motion. And this will be good. We'll experience this. When you bend your hips deeper, you have to bend forward to counteract where the weight is going. So if she were really upright with her knees this bent, that would actually be a very effortful posture. Does that make sense? And we'll try to I'll try to get us to experience that a little bit. Is everyone satisfied with this answer? I picked her on purpose because it looked like it was going to be tricky. Okay. Now it's time to do some action. So first, I'm going to talk through like the steps that we're going to do, and then we're going to do it together. So we're going to start by trying to find sitting. The idea is that there's 3 things to look for, and hopefully that will make sense. So the first thing is when we're focused on sitting, you need to pay attention to where your pelvis is contacting the surface you're on, and that your feet are on the ground. And we can I didn't spend any time in this presentation talking about when your feet are not on the ground, but we probably will have some time. But for the purposes of sitting, really, I'm mostly talking about sitting with a very minimal amount of support, like a very minimal amount of back support. We really want your feet to hit the earth. Also, if you're going to be there for any length of time actively engaged in something, we want your feet to be able to be on the ground, because then you're more likely to weight shift into your feet when you get up and not hurt yourself. 2, hopefully makes sense, is the whole thing we've been looking at. How do you line up the blocks? Then we're going to do a little breathing activity. Actually, maybe we're starting with the breathing activity now that I think of it, because your breathing will inform whether or not your blocks are lined up. And so when you can remember how we talked initially about those postures being effortless, that effortlessness is partly that we want your diaphragm, your main muscle of breathing, to be able to be free enough to do most of the breathing. Okay, let's see what I put next. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out. So if everyone can be in a surface where you are in what's called short sitting, so you're sitting on the thing, not on the floor. Floor sitting is harder to troubleshoot. And if you are really interested in my feedback, the best thing is going to be to show me your side view, if that's possible. If it's not possible, it's totally fine. Nice. So feet on the ground. Pelvis grounded, and we're going to kind of play around with what that means. Nice. So everyone have their feet on the floor? Sweet. And everyone has their pelvis on a nice surface. Great. Generally in sitting, so maybe we'll pause here and play for a second. Generally in sitting, if you are sitting on your pelvis in a balanced way, I don't like using like right and wrong, but if you're sitting on your pelvis in a balanced way, your rib cage will naturally know where to go most of the time. So we're going to do what I call, I put this in later, but we're going to do what I call Goldilocks-ing it. So as everyone, as you're sitting there, here's your pelvis. Okay, instead of demonstrating, I'm going to show you on a pelvis. So this is actually a pelvis in neutral, which means that you're sitting on the real front side of your sit bones. Okay, this is the tail. This is the pubic bone. So what you're going to do is kind of like rock back like you're sitting on your tailbone. And then rock forward like you're sitting up really, really super tall. And just kind of like teeter-totter back and forth until you feel like you might find a balance point that is sustainable and you're not on your tail. Okay. Everyone feel like they got their little teeter-totter? So now I want you to see, can you relax your belly? Can you breathe into your belly? Can you relax your shoulders? Get some deep breaths, get some yawns going. It's good. Okay. How's everyone feel about that? Give me some feedback on your posture, because I think we're going to pause and talk about breath, and then we'll come back to this again. But did you feel like you found a posture that your blocks felt relatively stacked? You could breathe and you're pretty relaxed.
Yeah.
I did, although I feel a little ache in my lower back, so I don't know if that's what that means.
Yes. So can everyone see Ellen here? If you look at her video, it might be really helpful. So what I would say right away is that the problem is that your sitting surface is too low for you. Do you feel how your knees are actually a little bit above your hips?
Yeah.
So without back support, that is probably going to be a little too deep for you. Generally in short sitting, in this posture where you're on a chair, You want your hips and knees to be at the same level or for your knees to be lower.
Okay. Is this better?
How does it feel?
Yeah, it definitely feels better. Like it doesn't, I don't have the same ache.
Yeah. Can you relax your belly?
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks better to me.
Okay.
You actually look like a good poster child. Excellent work. Okay,
All right. That was me.
anyone else? How's it feel? Good. It was Andrea. Andrea, are you using a couch? So you're all snuggled up into the back of the couch.
I am, when I actually have a pillow behind me, I bruised my tailbone about 2 months ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And then I did it on a moon bounce with my those moon slides, holding my grandson, and I hit the bottom. Yeah. And then I did a hayride with him on Sunday, so I'm sore all over again.
Well, so this is actually really good. I treat tailbones every day. When you're sitting, what would be helpful for your tailbone actually is to make sure you're not putting pressure on it. So when someone is having a lot of tailbone discomfort, it's actually a great time to learn how to sit. Because we tend to sit, you know how you guys were kept saying like, oh, that person looks like they're leaning forward. Oh, that, it seems like they should be more on their kind of backside, but that's generally not true for finding our balanced posture. And what generally helps the most to think about is think of a dog or a cat. And do they ever sit on their tail? No. In fact, when they go to sit, they sort of like fluff their tail out behind them to create space for sitting. So the same is actually true for us, even though our tail has become very foreshortened. So our bodies generally don't like a lot of pressure here, which is why it's helpful to tip the pelvis a little forward and think of sharing the weight between your feet and your sit bones instead of your sit bones and your tailbone. Does that make sense? It can be really hard in a deep couch. A deep couch means you might have to kind of get like 2 or 3 good pillows going. Or, I'm not talking about this specifically in the presentation, but if you're going to sit in a deep couch and really recline, then scoot your pelvis a little bit away from the back of the couch, put a pillow back there, and then put your feet up completely supported. Because then that couch or ottoman is supporting the weight of your legs, and the pillow is helping to support your spine. So you still got those 2 blocks stacked, but there's no extra pressure. Does that make sense? Are you able to find something that gets pressure off your poor bruised tailbone?
When you were doing the rocking, I could move. I did that until I did not feel the discomfort as much, which is also why I have the pillow. It's not a deep couch by any means, but the pillow.
Okay.
So yeah.
Great. Anyone else?
I think Jade wants to get some feedback. She's in position.
Jade's taking notes. I like it.
I'm ready. Yeah, I had a similar thing as you, Helene, of some lower back pain. So I added a yoga mat to my chair because it's a little bit sunken. And I feel like this is better.
Yep.
I feel like I could hold this a lot better. I think like I have sort of sort of agitated or squirmy nature. And so the idea of like finding something that feels good and staying there like makes me want to squirm more. I don't know if there's feedback about that, but I'm noticing like, oh, that feels good. And then I need to move because I have this energy.
Yeah. And that's, basically when someone trends that way, I just recommend you towards a certain subset of chairs. Like you might like something like a kneeling chair, something that really does almost rock or offer some kind of movement option. But I would say, what to pay attention to if you're someone who likes to wiggle is where are you wiggling from? So if the wiggle is originating more around your hips, like you feel like your hip crease is actually closing and opening, great, you're using one of those big joints. But if it's more like you're trying to manage your spine by doing something like this, then I would say whatever your base of support is, your pelvis and your feet are not supported enough. Does that make sense? Because there's nothing wrong with wiggling. It's more about, are you balanced enough that wiggling can come from big places? Does that make sense? And you're not feeling strain anywhere in your system, because actually, when we set ourselves up in a good posture, we advantage movement. And that is part of the reason why it's so beneficial. Does that make sense? I always tell people, we don't want to get like stuck in cement. Ugh. No one wants to be stuck in cement, right? And the more we're stuck, like, honestly, when people are like, what kind of chair should I get? I'm like, well, don't get the world's most comfortable chair, because then you'll never move. And that's not helpful. You know, like some people that I actually work with on ergonomics decide their dining room chair is the right height and it's uncomfortable enough that it cues them to get up every 45 minutes, which is usually my recommendation. It's roughly every 45 minutes is, according to the research, that's about how long we can actually focus on one particular task. Now, I have plenty of people who fight me on that, and that's fine. But generally, your body will prefer some amount of movement, even if it's 30 seconds of movement, about every 45 minutes. And then that creep thing that I was talking about also does apply to acute injury. So let's talk about Andrea for a second with the bruised tailbone. Anytime you have an acute injury, now you're in the like subacute to chronic phase at this point, but in that, especially in the first 7 days of an injury, most people have to move every 20 minutes, because that's how long it takes for creep to set in and for inflammation then to get into all the little nooks and crannies. So then that first move out of that position is like, oh. So anytime I have someone who injures their back, I have them on a repeating timer. You don't want to be, you can be in many different positions. You just don't want to be in as many for much longer than 20 minutes. Save sleep. Sleep, we want to make you as comfortable as possible, move as little as possible, but then just know that those first waking moments are going to take some time to get the system back to lubricated so that you can go about your day. Does that make sense? I just went on a little tangent, but. So Jade, do you feel like you found a good sitting thing for you?
Yeah, that's helpful to know. The big joint thing is a huge aha for me. So thank you. What are the other, so there's hip, as far as sitting, like hips are kind of the only one, right? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, this is what you do with your arms makes a difference. So that's where we can kind of play. The other thing that's true, and especially if you're more of a rocker fidgeter, I would probably put one of your feet up on a block while you're sitting, because you might like having some different levelness in your legs or feet. There's also like rocker foot plates for if you're at a desk for a while. Now you do have to adjust your chair, because it's going to be different if your feet are on the ground versus on the rocker plate, because it's usually a little high. But then that rocker plate, you can put some weight into it and it can rock or swing. And so a lot of my more fidgety people also like that. And I would still say, I think that I just got my spouse to pay a lot of money for an ergonomic kneeling chair, and they love it. And they are never sitting in the position that I hate when they sit. They love to sit like curled up, like in a deep squat on their chair. I'm just like, how is this a comfortable like, who is anyone talking to you in your body? How is this sustainable? And then they're like, oh, my back hurt, oh, my knee. And I'm like, yeah, of course. So anyway, they finally got this rocking kneeling chair. It's really cool. And you can sit on it backwards and forwards, and you can kind of put one foot on the kneeling pads, or you can put your knees on the kneeling pads. And then it has this rock to it. So it's a really nice, I love pieces of furniture that offer multiple ways of sitting. So for anyone who likes to fidget, I think those are really good to look into. I will say most smartly designed ergonomic chairs are over $600. So it is an investment. But I also like to remind people that, you know, if you're going to PT, $600 is gone like that. So, you know, when we think about these different places to place priority, sometimes how you're doing things for a long period during the day can make a really big difference.
Jessica, what about the whole sitting on a ball thing? Is that for somebody who's fidgety or just somebody, or that for posture? Do you think it helps us get in a good posture and like activates muscles, all the stuff they tell us about? I don't know. I think that used to be a fad, but I mean,
It was a really big fad. I always want someone to try it. So if you're feeling really beholden to, man, I really want to try out this, like Swiss ball is usually what people are using. I find that it's remarkably easy to slouch on them. So most people find that there's no support. I mean, the support is an unstable support. So you have to be really willing to be active, to be on a surface that is unstable. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because the ball, I mean, there are chairs that have the holder for the ball, if that makes sense. But then those have back supports. And I'm like, if you're on a ball, you shouldn't be using back support. That doesn't make any sense. Because you're going to get pressure right into your tailbone if you use that back support. It just, the people who are like, I made this ergonomic thing. I'm like, what is your training? I get a little huffy. But I myself tried to sit on a ball through grad school, through PT school, and it totally made my back pain worse. It really depends on like what your body's tendencies are, and knowing that it's just a really active choice. Like you have to be really vigilant with your body to be on that and not end up like most people, like what I just like hug my knees into the side, curl my toes under it, and then arch my back. And that was like a rest, like that was the effortless position on the ball because my body was seeking effortless support. But there is no such thing on the ball that's not putting your joints in end range positions and kind of locking them in.
Gotcha.
Okay. Ellen, did you want to talk about your sitting posture?
Sure. So I sit in sort of, it's almost like a lazy boy chair. I don't know if you can see, like here's the other one next to me. I don't know if you can really see. So it kind of reclines back a little bit, but my feet are up. I mean, this is sort of like my everyday kind of position, but I do tend to get up, I would say between 20 and 45 minutes to kind of move around and stretch. So, I mean, I'm not
sure.
Are
your feet supported on something?
Yeah, like there's like a leg rest. So my legs are up.
Yeah, so you're in what we call a supported reclined position.
Okay.
Yeah, supported reclined is great. Are you doing keying from that position?
Say that again?
Are you typing from that position?
Oh, sometimes, or once in a while, or just sort of like listening in, like a lot of Zoom meetings.
Yeah. So when you're being less active, a supported reclined position is fine.
Okay.
It's the position I recommend for like TV watching, movie watching. You want to be supported and restful.
Okay.
So you're just looking for any hot points. Like, does your butt feel like it starts to go to sleep? Then probably you need more support under your legs or more support under your upper back.
Yeah. I mean, lower back once in a while is an issue. But I mean, that might just be
my guess is that your legs aren't high enough.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Because I mean, a true like reclined position would have your butt as the lowest point.
Right.
Does that make sense? But almost all reclined chairs are still tipped forward so that you're not like looking at the ceiling.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe we're always making all these compromises.
Yeah, maybe I'll experiment with a pillow under my feet and see if that brings it up a little bit.
I would put the pillow under your thighs first.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Because again, if we think about we're respecting those blocks, the thing that's pulling on that the most with weight is your thighs. Like, yes, your feet sort of matter, but you're in like a V position. And your feet are sort of over here in the V, so that changing the support under them might be helpful, but changing the support under them, under your calves basically, is actually probably just going to traction it so that your back actually moves away from the back of your chair. I would put pillows under the heavy femur bone, so under your thigh bones, to take pressure out of your feet and put it more into your bum.
Okay, got it.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then if you were to key in that position, so I have plenty of people who like can only tolerate supported reclined.
Mhm.
Fine. But as soon as you're in that position, you want to be very careful what you do with your arms.
Mhm.
So we don't think of being supported, reclined, and keying. And that's partly because you're already leaning back into a surface, right? As soon as you reach for the keyboard,
Mhm.
this becomes an unsustainable posture,
Okay.
right? If all of us just held our arms out like this, you'll notice that very quickly your shoulders will start talking to you, unless you're a ballerina and you
Mhm.
practice it all the time. But our arms prefer for elbows to be by our rib cage. That's the least strain on the shoulder over time.
Mhm.
So if you're going to be in a supported recline for keying, I make a very strong recommendation that you key with the keyboard on your lap
Mhm.
so that you're not reaching.
Mhm. Got
And then
it.
you can decide how to make the mouse work from that position if you need it.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's why, if you're a really active keyer or active mouser,
Mhm.
the supported recline position is just not a really good one.
Okay.
Because it just doesn't let you move in your big joints very well.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? It's meant to be a restful posture, not an active posture.
Okay. Got it. Thank
But for
you.
meetings,
Yeah.
for sitting in things like this, fantastic, because you're actually unweighting your spine really nicely, right?
Mhm.
So for me, it's partly, it's really all about respecting the spine. And then
Mhm.
it's like, how do we play with how to support the other things so that that spine gets to stay stacked in those blocks and not receiving any kind of chattiness with us? Because that chattiness usually says like, I'm working and I don't want to be working. Does that make sense? Cool.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we spent a long time on that, but I think that was helpful. Is everyone doing great?
It was good. Are you going to talk about slouching on the couch, or is that pretty much what you were telling Ellen about?
That's pretty much what I was telling
It's
Ellen.
like, because if I'm not in a chair like hers, but I'm on a couch where it's like my feet are out, whatever. Let's say I'm on the, long side and I'm
Yep.
staring at the TV. You're saying, should I be putting bending my knees enough and then putting a pillow under several pillows under my back to make it more like a 45-degree angle kind of situation?
That's one way. I would say that your yes is the short answer for getting the least amount of strain. But if you want to be more upright, you can. You just probably need to walk your feet in and bend your knees and hips up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Long
Not
sitting
have the
is
legs flat.
So that's called long sitting, when your legs are out straight.
Yeah.
Long sitting is very difficult to do respecting your spine. You have to have very, very, very flexible hamstrings in order to sustain that posture.
And
So
cross-legged,
you always need to bend your legs up,
Yeah.
or bend at least one leg up. That even one leg can really change how the stress is born through the stacked blocks.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And the other thing is just making sure that the surface behind you, like the arm of the sofa, I think if I'm understanding the way you're setting yourself up correctly, is just like a really firm arm. And then you're the other way to think of it is like, so say you start sitting up and you scoot your bum all the way back to that little arm and you got this nice support on your back, and then you're bending your knees up and you're like, oh, this feels so good. But then you notice you're there for a little while, and so your butt starts to scoot away from the arm a little bit, because you're starting to be like, oh, it's so nice here.
Yes.
Gravity's taking over. So then I just say, think of where your body has created a bridge. So now there's probably a bridge between where your rib cage is sitting on the side of the sofa and where your butt is on the seat. So you want to fill in the gaps of that bridge. So stuff some pillows under there, because bridges create strain. This is actually a really nice segue, which I wasn't planning on talking about, to sleeping, is we look for bridges, we look for gaps. And that is where the body needs support so that the muscles can actually soften and relax. Does that make sense? Bridge hunting or gap hunting.
Yeah. And to fill in the gaps. Yeah.
Yep. Your body doesn't like hanging.
Right. Yeah. And then, because then I guess your spine would just go concave or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And most people's lumbar spine discs do not like that posture.
Yeah. No.
So
Okay.
can you tell us how that relates to sleeping? You were just mentioned the sleeping. Is there like specific positions you've noticed that have a lot of gaps?
It really depends on your body.
Mm-hmm.
So side sleeping is probably the one that naturally has the most gaps for everyone. And yet it's probably the most popular way to fall asleep. So what I teach people in side lying is how to appropriately fill in the gap between your head and your shoulder, right? So if I'm side lying, this is the bed. Is everyone with me without me changing my verticality? I would say one of the hardest pieces to consistently get right is not putting your shoulder on the pillow. Because as soon as you put your shoulder on the pillow, this is actually the position of your neck, or this is the position of your neck. And getting that pillow, I strongly recommend down for under your head, or a down replacement if you're allergic, because it is so conforming to your body. And your head is ultimately not that heavy, so it doesn't compress down too much over time. Does that make sense? So if we go through the rest of side lying, I would say head and neck are some of the most important. And you'd be surprised at how much properly supporting the head and neck can actually take pressure away from the low back. And then in side lying, especially for pelvises that were meant to birth babies, our pelvises are generally wider than our rib cages. So we have like rib cage, pelvis, knees. Yeah. So we have like a little diamond shape. So you want to put a pillow between that whole top and bottom leg to even out that knee pressure. And that usually takes pressure away from pelvis to rib cage. Does that make sense? Not in everyone. If you have really wide hips and a really narrow torso, sometimes I have to put towels in there to support that. And when we're talking about supporting the limb, particularly a leg, because legs are 1/3 of our body weight, you want to use a foam or cotton pillow, something that does not compress well over time, because it's holding the weight of your leg. Now, if you have a sensitive neck, sometimes people actually have to hug a pillow because that top arm pulls them into rotation. Rotation is actually very taxing on the spine. Passively anyway. So does that answer your question about side lying? And Helen, did you have another comment?
No, this is very helpful, because I'm just like imagining how I'm sleeping at night and I need to make some adjustments. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, so I was a side sleeper when I had my back injury, and I had to teach myself to sleep on my back, because my back just, even with all the proper pillows, I could not get my back to be happy in that position. Back sleeping is probably the easiest, but it's the one that makes us feel the most vulnerable. It's the least supportive of our nervous systems. Our nervous systems like a lot of coddling on the front body. So I did teach it to myself. It took me 4 months to learn to sleep on my back. If you're sleeping on your back, it gets back more into what we're talking about with reclined sitting. Most of us actually can't lay flat without our low back popping up a little bit. Beds are a little better because they're squishy. Hard floors will really show you where your hinge points are. But almost everyone usually needs to support under the thighs for back sleeping. But other than that, it's usually good. The only thing is, most of the time, the amount of support you need for side lying for your head is very different in back lying. Back lying, you don't need near the same amount of support. So if you're a neck irritable, if your neck is more irritable, sometimes you have to actually switch out the pillow, because if you have your side sleeping pillow and then you slip onto your back and your neck is like this, your neck might be real upset by the time you get to that 8-hour mark of sleep. Or maybe you don't get there, but like that can be something to look for, is maybe my neck is just being really taxed in this position.
Well, I mean, in stores, they show you, they have, oh, hello. In stores, they show you, they say on the label on the pillow, like for back sleeping, for
Yep.
side sleeping, for, so it's kind of funny.
Yeah, which can be helpful. But I would say the gimmicks of like one pillow fits all humans is just false.
Yeah.
So I mean, for down pillows, the other thing to just know, this is like a really nerdy fact, but like they break down over time, particularly real down, because whether or not you want to like really acknowledge that this is a thing, all of the bugs that live on us eat the pillow.
Yeah.
So it will, when you buy it, that is the fluffiest it is ever going to be. The like true recommendation is replace your feather pillow every 6 months. I would say that is not financially sustainable for just about anyone.
Yeah.
I recommend that you reinvestigate every 2 years. Is this pillow still serving me? And maybe you have, I mean, if you're me and you're my spouse, I work from my house. So we have like, I don't know, 16 pillows. So we just like, if that pillow isn't serving you, you just move on to the next one. And sometimes they kind of refluff after you don't use it every night. And so then you can kind of like go back to it again, or maybe a side sleeping pillow becomes a back sleeping pillow. And then maybe it just dies and we have to throw it out. Do you know what I'm saying? But there can be like a little bit of an evolution there. Yeah, you got me on a real nerdy tangent. Okay. More questions. Those are really good questions. We got into sleep posture.
All over the place. I know.
I'll say one more thing about sleep posture, and that is I used to do this restorative yoga class with this woman who had this cue that I think is really helpful when you're trying to find the most comfortable sleep posture, especially when you're first falling asleep. And that is, if you could be 2% more comfortable, make the change to become 2% more comfortable. Because probably 2% is actually more like 10%. And if we think about you really being supported for a long stretch of hours, like you want to sleep for, I mean, probably now that I know more about sleep research, you're probably staying still for like 2 hours at a time, truly. And we all wake up every 2 to 4 hours, but you're wanting your body to feel like it can really rest in those 2 to 4 hours, which is what allows you to stop moving, which is what allows us to get into the deepest part of our sleep, which is the most healing part of our sleep. So extra important when you're dealing with an injury. Make sense? Okay. Totally abandoned the slideshow. Let's go back and see what I wrote over here. Okay. Breathing. We're going to take a foray into breathing. We might not get to everything at this rate, but is everyone getting their needs met? Okay. I want to spend a moment to talk about the diaphragm and pelvic floor. This is part of the reason why lining up our blocks is so important. So you may or may not know that your respiratory diaphragm lives here in your body. So it lives up under your rib cage. I'm going to show you a better visual of it in the next slide. It is a parallel vision to your pelvic floor. So when we inhale, the diaphragm descends, the pelvic floor relaxes. And when we exhale, the opposite occurs. The diaphragm moves back to rest, the pelvic floor moves back to rest. So if you have your blocks lined up, this is allowed to occur. When you don't have your blocks lined up, most often what happens is you're neither using your pelvic floor nor your respiratory diaphragm to breathe. And they should naturally be occurring the majority of our day. So the diaphragm is probably one of the weirdest muscles in the body. I still think it's weird, even though I've been doing this for 10 years. So this is the rib cage, and it lives domed up under the rib cage at rest. This is at rest. And then when it contracts, what happens is a central tendon shortens, which pulls it down. So it's here. And then as you inhale, it pulls down, which has two effects. It displaces some of our abdominal organs, which is why often we feel our belly move. And that creates negative pressure in the rib cage to inflate the lungs. So it is by far the most efficient way to breathe is using your diaphragm. Your diaphragm was 100% made for breathing. Now, if you shut down that rib cage pelvic alignment, it's really quickly, it's easiest to think about it probably from a rounded spine position. Can you see how then the little parachute sort of that is our diaphragm would have nowhere to go? You're sort of ramming all of your belly contents right into it. And so it can't actually descend. So what happens as soon as that occurs, which usually none of us notice, is all of a sudden we start to use what's called accessory muscles of breathing. And so we start to chest breathe. And those muscles were meant to do that, but not over time. So these are the muscles that are responsible for, if I'm going for a run, I'm going to use my diaphragm and my accessory muscles because I need so much oxygen exchange. But if we just shut down our diaphragm and only allow our accessory muscles of breathing to be the primary breathers, we generally end up with neck tension because the accessory muscles are mostly neck muscles. So now they are doing breathing and neck. And most muscles don't like doing double duty for long periods of time. They're totally fine to do it for short periods of time. But it's sort of like the use big joints for big movements concept. We want to use muscles primarily for what they were designed for, because as we ask them to do other things, what we usually get is a pain pattern in that muscle because it's like, I'm overworked. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's do a quick, yeah. So we kind of, let's go back to, oops, not that. Let's go back to our sitting posture for a minute and check in with our breathing. So this, I want to make sure that you have a little test. So, we talk through everyone's posture to some degree, but I would love for you to be able to find that a little more easily on your own. So if you're in a sitting posture that feels like it's relatively good, whether or not it's good, it doesn't really matter, but you're going to put a hand on your chest and a hand on your belly. And I want you just to take some comfortable breaths. And notice which hand is primarily moving. Or is it equal? So in the most efficient sitting and breathing postures for rest, your belly hand should be predominantly the hand moving and the chest hand should be relatively quiet. Is that happening for people? So you can play. This is where it can be fun to do that, what I was calling Goldilocks. So now roll onto your tail a little bit, and millimeters of motion can make big differences here. It's not like you have to move a foot to feel a difference. So if you just round onto that tail and then try and breathe, just see how that changes where the pressure goes in your body. Or if you sit up really tall, or maybe just a little more leaning forward, actually, maybe that's where you need to be. And you notice your belly can actually relax a little bit. I don't know. We're playing because everyone's body is its own unique snowflake, truly. But I will say that if you are fairly certain that you are in neutral, or as neutral as you can get, and you're having trouble checking in with your breathing, I would actually recommend that you consider working with a provider. I was someone who my back pain taught me not to breathe in my belly. And it took me, honestly, years to learn to breathe into my belly. But pain in the region of the abdomen can make it very difficult to reinstate a restful breathing pattern. And that's for actually many reasons, but pain is something that tells our brain that we're like outrunning the bear. It's the same as the fight or flight response for a lot of people. And so you get kicked into chest breathing just because your system is upregulated. So there's so much interplay here between posture and breathing and how your nervous system responds. And that's part of the reason why I think it's so important to, at the very least, pay attention to what you do on a repeated basis. Any questions on the breathing? Okay. All right. Do we want to try standing?
Sure.
So standing is like simpler and less simple all at the same time. Generally in standing, we don't really have to worry about your pelvic block because what matters more is actually where your feet are. So if you want to go ahead and stand up, your feet are going to matter, and then we're going to pay attention. It's the same things, the same 3 steps. But when you're standing, you can kind of Goldilocks it again, right? You can kind of shift and put your weight on your toes or shift and put your weight into your heels. And ideally, we want to be somewhere where you're actually loading evenly over your whole foot. I find that most people stand with a lot of weight tipped back, so they tend to stand with more weight in their heels. I really like this analogy, stolen from the same yoga teacher, that each foot is like a car. And so at the base of your pinky toe and big toe are your front tires, and the base of your heel on the inside and outside are your back tires. And you want to load all 8 tires evenly. So you don't really want to be on your heels, but you also really don't want to be on the outside of the foot or the inside of the foot. You're trying to like kind of find just like, where's a like happy medium, or maybe you're a wiggler. And so then we're just looking for, where do you start to lose your base, right? So you don't want to go so far that you have to take a step. So we're trying to get your center of mass, which is mostly somewhere in everyone's abdomen to pelvis. That's where your center of your weight is, evenly distributed over your base of support, which is your 2 feet.
And your knees are doing what? Are they soft or they're not?
They are not hyperextended, so they shouldn't be locked out.
Right.
They shouldn't be bent either. I had to actually correct hyperextended standing or locked out knee standing. That was part of my back pain. So what I have to do when I'm standing is often twiddle. So that's what I'm doing right now. That's why I'm wiggling a little bit, because I like twiddle my knees a little bit, which is just making sure that I'm not locking them.
Right.
But standing is great for so many reasons, one of which is we're ready to move. If you're going to move in any direction, you are probably going to pick up a foot and move, right? So, you know, when we start to think about what are the postures that advantage using big joints over little joints, that's part of the reason I think why this whole like is sitting the new smoking kind of thing is happening. And it's not necessarily that standing all day is actually what I recommend, but it's just knowing that particularly if you're doing more interactive tasks, if you do it while standing, if you need to reach to get these other articles or whatever you need to do your task, standing is going to make it more likely that you actually move your feet to do that. Whereas in sitting with your butt planted, you're more likely to just shear in your spine.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just, again, this is all just kind of like food for thought of how do we make choices based on what we're doing to respect the spine and advantage the big joints to do what we want the big joints to do. Questions on that? How's everyone standing? How's your standing posture feeling? I find that almost all, I think it's cultural. All Americans tend to stand on their heels. Other cultures that are a little bit more close talker cultures, people tend to be more on their toes. I think it's a little bit cultural. Being on your heels can also be more of a passive way of standing. But again, you want to kind of listen to what, like even your heels can be like, that's a lot of pressure. What are you doing? Okay, so can everyone check in with their breathing and see how that's going in standing? Standing can be a little bit trickier just because our particular curvatures in our spine can really influence what's happening. But if you just play with where you put the weight in your feet, sometimes you can get a really different response in your breathing because especially when you're kind of leaned forward, sometimes your abdominals have to be like really tight in order to like counterbalance that force. And generally we want your belly to be able to relax. It's not going to relax quite as much as it does in sitting because it is more active in standing. Standing is 7% more energy expenditure than sitting, in case you wanted to feel justified in like burning more calories while you're standing. Okay. But I use that conversely too to the people who are like, oh, I switched all to a standing desk and I'm really tired. And I'm like, yeah, it's 7% more energy that you're using. And that's a lot over a whole day. Okay. This is another time when, now I have a picture of it. Jade, like for you, you might like to like stand with one leg on like a yoga block. It can be higher too, as long as you're respecting the blocks. That works really well for me. Okay, any questions on standing? Sorry, I'm getting over a cold that my toddler shared with me. So kind. Why else should we care about posture? We already kind of covered this, which is great. Posture determines how we move. So my next thought was going to be, we're like very fast running out of time, is to practice moving from sitting to standing, because just making a change in how you move from sitting to standing can be like 100 different touch points in your day. If you think of getting out of bed, getting on and off the toilet, sitting down, getting up from meals, sitting down, getting up from your workstation. I also usually have people practice it from their favorite restful chair. So I wanted to talk about like moving from sitting to standing, which is essentially teaching you how to squat. Does that make sense? Okay, so I took a little video of myself. Thought this would be easier. Can you guys see this? And what I want you to notice, I think I go through it a couple of times, is that the way that I am choosing to do that respects my spine. Do you see that in these photos, the stills that I took of that video? So here's the little poofing still going on in the background. What I would say most people make a really big mistake in is that they try to stand up before there's weight in their legs. What does that look like? I didn't take a video of this, but it's totally how I used to move from sit to stand. So,
well, I think I just tried it, and I feel like I usually just stand up with my back straight. Like I don't pivot forward like you're doing in this.
Yes. So let's just try. So stand up from where you're sitting and do it how you normally feel like you're doing it. And generally there's speed involved. And when we're going to change it, we always have to slow down. So just know that any new habit is going to require slowing down. Okay. But then I want you to try, so that everyone experience it in their own way.
Yeah.
Whatever your pattern is in your current chair, and different chairs can elicit different patterns. And then I want you to do what I'm showing in the video here, which is you're going to let your arms slide between your legs until all of the weight is in your feet and your butt starts to rise on its own. And then you're going to stand up. Okay. Jade, I see you doing something. Do you mind if I call you out just a tiny bit?
Yeah, call me out.
Okay. So Evolutionarily, we go where our eyes tell us to go. We are very visually dominant creatures. So what I noticed Jade doing, let me get you guys see me?
Yeah.
Is if I'm trying to slide my arms, but I pick my head up, do you see what just happened to my back?
Arches.
Yes. So my spine responds so strongly to where I put my visual focus. So even though I told you to slide your arms between your legs, as soon as I pick my head up, I can't actually weight transfer into my feet because now my spine is actually putting weight back in my bum. Does that make sense? So we got to keep, sometimes I actually have people put a fist under their chin, and that way you have to keep it through the whole transition so that your head and neck don't tell your lower back what to do. It's smart. It's a spinal reflex that's really hard to overcome. The easiest way to overcome it is just to keep our focus down. How is that? So what I call these is sort of the difference between mechanically sound or appropriate, sort of like respecting the spine to stand, or what I find most other people do is like get it over as soon as possible. It doesn't matter how crappy it is, right? Or we kind of it's not entirely as true in this posture, but I find a lot of people are not letting their feet help, if that makes sense. And this partly comes from sitting on surfaces where our feet aren't on the ground. And so we don't even like perceive that we could do it a different way. Does that make sense?
So which muscles are we using
Ooh, what a good
differently in your way versus like the pop up out of my chair way?
So when you are doing it my way, you're doing the main muscle loading of squats. So it should be predominantly glutes, quads, and hamstrings.
Okay.
When you do it, it really depends on like what strategy you're using to do it fast. I would say most are doing what I think you described, which is you're just standing up really quickly. So you're sort of like this.
Yeah, and probably not as I mean, pretty much staying erect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I think is interesting is noticing that your feet usually, when you stand up like that, your weight all ends up in your heels.
Yeah.
What generally a general rule of thumb is that wherever you're noticing your weight is that's the side of your body you're loading. So probably you're loading your spine, you're loading your back muscles inappropriately. Whereas when we're standing up, the primary muscles of trunk extension, not back extension. So back extension is this. Trunk extension is I went from bending to getting straight up and down. Back, this kind of extension is these muscles, and they do a lot of compression over time, and they're not actually meant to do a whole lot of lifting. Okay. They're not very big. I mean, they're big, but they're not as big as this.
Yeah.
This is the primary thing that should be lifting us up off of the surface we're sitting on. The trouble is we spend so much time sitting, it's getting a massage all day long. And so often it is like, I tell people their glutes are in Hawaii. They've just gone on vacation. They're having a great time. They're getting full-time massages. And so when you stand up, they're like, she's not talking to me. But that's who's supposed to be working.
Okay.
And that's where we can start to think about that we are what we repeatedly do concept is the more we sit, the more we're actually stretching and elongating our glutes. So that's where for someone who's like sitting full time for work, I might recommend that they try standing because standing is a glute activity, or at the very least, it's a hip extended or hip neutral position and not a hip flexed position. Does that make sense? You're not bent at the hip. You're straight. Okay. I think you can hear the little huffing in the background. Okay, so that was really meant to be the big thing that we would implement into some of your daily activities. And we ended up spending so much more time on the other postures, but I think that's fine because it all matters. But just to run through a few other things, if you wanted to know, the more you're stacked in your blocks, the better your balance is. Hopefully that like naturally makes sense. You then can use any muscle around your whole center of mass to regain your balance. Whereas if you start off with your blocks all sort of hinged in one direction, usually you've totally shut off any ability to use the muscles on the hinge side. Breathing, covered that, I think, pretty extensively. Something that I didn't really cover so much is that the core is what is designed to stabilize our blocks over each other. So if we're going to push or pull or load our spine, it's the core that should be stepping in. And in the same way that when we shift the blocks so that they're not lined up, we also then advantage or disadvantage the core to work. And our core is really meant to work the most in neutral. So anytime you're outside of neutral, you're getting not as good of a core response. And the pelvic floor is part of the core. So oftentimes I'm treating people and I'm finding that their core isn't functioning well, their sitting posture isn't great. Wow, all of these things are mechanically disadvantaging the pelvic floor. They're making it harder for the pelvic floor to do its normal job. And if we can just relieve the strain by changing how they're setting up their blocks or how they're loading their core, suddenly the pelvic floor gets to live its best life again. Okay, hopefully it makes sense. If we're thinking about the, when we're breathing, there should be sort of this like movement in the belly. When we shut that down, we also actually shut down our ability to let our digestive function live its best life. And then finally, though there's probably more, the other thing is what I was talking a little bit about, nervous system regulation. So when our spine is out of neutral, generally I understand it most through the regulation of breathing, but when we can't breathe with our rest and digest diaphragm, then we promote that fight or flight or freeze response. So in our like 3 minutes left, does anyone have any comments on how they want to change their daily practice?
Well, I know I'm going to be paying attention to my posture and my neutral spine. And certainly for those sit to stand thing was very helpful, seeing the video. Yeah.
Great.
So I that was that and just the practice. So thank you.
Yeah.
That was really great.
Great. Anyone else?
I want to try back sleeping more. And yeah, like the big aha for me was the big joints and letting myself wiggle from those places and letting myself move mostly from those places.
Yes.
Yeah, I can really see that's kind of a missing piece for me. So
yeah, I think it's a missing piece for a lot of people. It's actually where I spend almost all my time actually when I'm working with a client one-on-one, is understanding where does your body like to move and how do we understand that in relation to like maybe your discomfort, and then how could we shift it? Like, are you moving in small places? And we could just shift a few things to help you move in the bigger places, which actually resets the whole balance of the system. That's the reason why I think changing the way you sit to stand can make a huge difference in like loading your glutes, not loading your spine, being able to do lifting. I mean, the more that you practice it, the more you practice it. It's kind of this like, you know, snowball effect. And I really like, I mean, not only because I'm a pelvic floor therapist, but I really like thinking about getting on and off the toilet, because I know that you're doing that at least 6 to 8 times a day. And that's like, you can put a little sticky maybe above your toilet seat just so that you remember like, oh, I'm going to practice getting down and getting up from this toilet seat differently.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you like imprint on your toilet seat and you're like, I am always going to do this the way that is best for my body. And now suddenly you've built in something that you were already doing anyway, but now you're doing it in a way that allows your glutes to get stronger, maybe your thigh muscles to get stronger, and your back to not take strain. And that can be really huge cumulatively.
Yeah.
Okay, I had so many ideas. There's some ideas. That's it.
Hey,
My little family.
thank you so much. I know we are running short on time. I just wanted to thank you for doing this. This is just really so much helpful information. And I love the way you showed it with the blocks and everything. It just, the visual is, I'm going to remember that now. I'm going to always be thinking about stacking, how am I stacking? So that's very helpful. And I'm sorry.
I apologize in advance for when you see the people who aren't stacking and you hurt.
I know.
Welcome
I'm
to
going
my
to be
world.
channeling Jessica and being like, oh yeah. So, and I want to make sure to get it on the recording that you have a gift for those people who are here today and who are going to be watching the recording. So can you tell us a little bit about the free 30-minute consult that you offer?
Yeah. So I wanted to offer a free 30-minute consult, a video consult. If you're open to it, that's going to be much more helpful, because in 30 minutes, we can't necessarily, we can't like fully diagnose maybe what's going on, but we might be able to understand a little bit more about your tendencies or what your, how you spend the majority of your day is either supporting your system, or maybe it's causing some strain to your system. So for some people, that's a really easy fix, and just teaching them sit to stand can make a huge difference. But sometimes it's nice to actually have like really good one-on-one visuals on that to pick up where your body likes to sort of like sneak out or compensate. And sometimes within that consult too, part of my goal is helping someone understand if you actually need a professional assessment, because sometimes it's more than just your furniture. It's more than just changing your posture. Sometimes there's some things going on in your body that actually need more support before they're available to do the things we're asking. So if the things that we're showing in this talk don't feel intuitive or easy in your body, that might be a sign that you could use some body support in some way. It kind of depends on what we notice as to who might best fit that. But I spend a lot of time giving referrals. So if you're local, you could see me, but if you're not, like there's so many wonderful providers who can help figure out like, why doesn't your hip want to move? Because if you can't move in your hip and it got super stiff, doing what I'm asking is going to feel really hard, or maybe it's painful. And so we don't want you to try and fight your body through the process. I don't think that's helpful. So kind of gaining maybe some like little tips and tricks that are really individualized is the goal of the 30-minute session. And also really being honest about like, do you really need to see someone for some body work? And that's really where the effort should be spent. Or maybe you need to get a fancy chair. I don't know.
Yeah.
But 30 minutes can give us some sense of that.
And you feel that you don't work with people remotely, like you prefer to work with somebody. I mean, obviously you prefer to work with them in person, but past the, after the consult, it's usually better to refer to somebody in your location?
It depends. Without getting too technical, if I think you really need hands-on work, then I'm going to refer you to someone who can do hands-on work. I have worked remotely with people who it seems as though it's mostly a strength issue. Okay. If it's a strength or just like a motor plan, like I don't know how to like make my body do the things you're asking, but I have it available to me, then I can usually teach you. Actually, video is proven to be quite great. I didn't do it as much before COVID, but COVID has really taught me that there's a lot that I can pick up on video.
Right.
And so I've created training programs for people. Sometimes it's more like strength training. Oftentimes it's a little bit more like, oh, I'm having like leaking, and oh, I realize your core is actually really weak. So it makes sense that maybe you're having leaking because your core is the weak link. And that core training can be done remotely really easily.
Okay. Okay, that's super helpful. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate it.